Hello and welcome to the Reasonably Good Life. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brooks. This is a podcast and YouTube channel about using reason to pursue the good life in this complicated world. We are on episode 3, which is The Secret of Success. So if you've listened to the previous episode, I was talking about the purpose of life. Well, actually, it is a purpose of life because I'm not arrogant enough to claim that I know the purpose of life. Obviously, there's a lot of different ideas out there about what the purpose of life is. But in the previous episode, I offered the idea that a purpose of life is to learn, grow, and improve. And I think most people would agree that that is a purpose of life. One of the things that we're here for is to be a little bit better than we were the day before, to grow as human beings, to achieve more, accomplish more, be kinder, gentler, more compassionate, be a better husband, father, friend, colleague, all those things. So if we agree with that, then there is the question of how do we achieve this purpose in life of learning, growing, and improving? What's the secret of that? So that's what I'm calling the secret of success. So there are many different ideas about that, but as I said before, I like to pull on different sources of wisdom, from ancient wisdom to pop culture, because I feel like a lot of these things are saying the same things. And when they do, and there's this kind of convergence, to me, it creates more punch, more power, more validity that there's something to this. So let's listen to Lao Tzu. He was the founder of Taoism, which is kind of related to Buddhism. And in the book, the Tao Te Ching, which I highly recommend, very short book, but it's like drinking wisdom from a fire hose. It is just jam-packed with very deep wisdom. But here's what Lao Tzu said: "Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. Whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life." Okay, take that in for a second. Now we'll turn to something a little different. This is from the Southern rock band 38 Special, which I'm old enough to remember the early MTV days, and they were a staple on early MTV because there were very few videos, and they played 2 songs by 38 Special over and over again, and one is called "Hold On Loosely." So I want you to listen to the chorus for that. Just hold on loosely, but don't let go. If you cling too tightly, you're gonna lose control. Your baby. So listen to those lyrics. Hold on loosely, but don't let go. If you cling too tightly, you're going to lose control. It sounds similar to the message from Lao Tzu. Here's another one from Kenny Rogers' The Gambler. You might have heard that song. Here's some of those lyrics.
You got to know when to hold up, know when to fold up, know when to walk away, and know when to run. You never count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done.
So you've got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run. There again is a very similar idea conveyed in this song. Now, another bit of wisdom, again, that sort of converges, saying the same thing, is from Bruce Lee, who actually was very inspired by Eastern thinking, but Bruce Lee was a martial artist who died in 1973, and he was an iconoclast. I'm a very big Bruce Lee fan. His movies are kind of cheesy by today's standards, but he stands out. He was just a meteor going across the sky. He's just amazing. His passion, how much he read and learned and trained obsessively. He wanted to become the best martial artist he could. And he had some ideas about what a martial artist was, like what it takes to become a great martial artist, that were really against the grain of the time. And here's what he says about it.
This is what it is, okay? I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
So his message there is be water, and how water can change and flow, and it can be hard and fast, or soft and supple. And as a martial artist, he was encouraging people to be water, to flow like water, because, and you have to remember, mixed martial arts, it's really big with the UFC and things like that now, but back in his day, you were either a kung fu stylist or a taekwondo or karate or wrestling, judo, you were a particular stylist. They really didn't have mixed martial arts as we know it now. In fact, Bruce Lee was one of the first mixed martial artists, or at least one who advocated this idea of mixed martial arts, because he believed the rigidity of a particular style, it constrained a person. And he knew as a martial artist that one never knows what we're going to be dealt with, what the attackers, how many will there be? Will there be multiple attackers? What size would they be? Would we be in a closed-in space where we can't kick or punch, or is the ground is it concrete, so falling would hurt extra? So he had this idea that we need to pull from whatever martial arts, all the different types, all the different styles, and use what is effective. And that's where the whole be water comes from, this idea. And it makes perfect sense now, but at the time, he was really swimming upstream with this be water thing. It was just very new, and it ruffled a lot of feathers. But I take a lot of inspiration. I've done martial arts for about 30 years now. And yeah, Bruce Lee is a hero of mine. And I really like that he was ahead of his time in what he was advocating. So again, all these different things, Lao Tzu, 38 Special, Kenny Rogers, Bruce Lee, they're all kind of saying the same thing. So what are they saying? Be flexible, be adaptive, make adjustments to what life throws at you, because you just never know what life is going to throw at us. Now, this idea of being flexible, it sounds like common sense, right? It's too simple. But I want to offer to you that there is much untapped power in flexibility, and that a lot of suffering on both individual and societal levels comes from when we are not being flexible enough. So if we think of what flexibility is, it goes back to adaptation in our evolution. Like, it's what helped us to survive and thrive to begin with. If our human species, if we were not flexible and adaptive, indeed, any animal, any organism, if they don't adapt, they die. So we were adaptive enough to be able to survive very, very difficult conditions historically. So survival and to survive and thrive necessitates flexibility, because life is not static. Change is constant. So here's pulling from about this idea of constant change. Let's listen to Rush, Tom Sawyer. You might have heard this song. I love Rush, and some very deep lyrics in their songs. This is from Tom Sawyer.
Always hope for your discontent. Those changes are permanent.
So in speaking of Tom Sawyer, he knows changes aren't permanent, but change is. Change is permanent. It is constant change. I hope I pronounced this Greek philosopher right. It's Heraclitus, born in 554 BC. You might have run across this quote. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he's not the same man. So this idea that change is constant, because change is constant, we must be flexible to adapt to whatever life throws at us. I mean, think of COVID. We got thrown this huge curveball of a pandemic, which I thought, would never happen in my lifetime. I've watched all the dystopian, future movies and Outbreak and Contagion and things like that. And, you think, well, that'll never really happen. That's something for the movies or just to scare us. And then here we have our own pandemic. And yet we were flexible and adaptive enough to deal with it. Now, there has been a lot of suffering, but think of just mask wearing when we first had to start wearing masks. It was difficult, right? It felt very foreign. I remember the first times I was wearing a mask and going into the grocery store, it just was surreal. I just was thinking, is this my life? Is this our world? What have we come to? And just looking at other people's faces, they seemed like they were on the same wavelength, that we were all in this collective suffering. But a funny thing happened after time went by. I got used to wearing a mask. It wasn't that big a deal. In fact, now that the mask mandates are being dropped and I'm vaccinated, I was at the grocery store the other day and a lot of people weren't wearing masks. And I feel weird taking off my mask. I've adapted so much to wearing it, it feels weird to take it off. I'm getting there, but you see how adaptive we are, that we can grow accustomed to wearing masks. So I have to admit here too, I'm enamored with this idea of flexibility because I'm a recovering inflexible person. Well, I'm still inflexible if people know me, but I'd say I'm less inflexible. I'm more flexible than I used to be. And I've learned the benefits of flexibility over time. Historically, though, I used to want to be right over being effective. I would argue over stupid things incessantly, and it was like banging my head against a wall. I'm sure I drove a lot of people nuts. But that stubbornness is a rigidity, and it's an inflexibility, and it's not very adaptive, as I'm sure people on the receiving end of my stubbornness would attest. So I'm working on it. Oddly enough, I'm kind of stubborn about the idea of flexibility. So now I believe in flexibility so much, if someone else is rigid about an idea or too stuck in my view, right, then I'm judgmental and maybe pushy. Maybe I'm rigid about flexibility, which now I'm like, oh man, now I've just got another form of being stubborn and rigid and inflexible. So now with this inflexibility, I'm kind of making a case. And again, I don't claim that I have some super secret special knowledge about all this, but I think I'm making a case that hopefully you can use some of this in your own life. And here's the other case I'm making, is that a lot of suffering in life on personal and societal levels comes from some form of inflexibility. So, I'm a psychologist, so I work with clients on various struggles. One is depression, right? And depression is a form of stuckness where someone starts to view themselves, the world, the future in these really dark ways, like I suck, I'll always suck, people suck, the world sucks, things aren't going to get better, nobody likes me, I'm unlovable, those kind of things. Very heavy thoughts, right? But it's not only heavy thoughts, they get stuck on the heavy thoughts. So there's all these other ways to view themselves, the world, the future, but their mind starts to gravitate toward this negative way and just sort of get stuck there. Even anxiety is a form of inflexibility, and anxiety is usually more of worrying about the future, like what if this happens, what if that happens, oh, I'm going to a party, what if I don't know anybody, what if I'm just stuck as a wallflower looking at my phone, that'll be so awkward, or what if I say the wrong thing or make a bad joke or whatever. I'm giving a presentation, what if I mess up, what if I forget what I'm going to say, what if, but it's not just what if, it's what if negative, and it gets stuck more on the negative. It isn't what if I do a great job and everybody likes me, or I have a whole lot of fun at the party. The anxiety is worrying about the bad thing happening, and it's overly negative. It's disproportionately negative. And so that's a form of inflexibility, and it causes suffering. The polarization we see in today's society, and the left and right have become more polarized. They used to overlap, and every time we think it can't get any worse, it does. And I'm very against polarization. I feel like it's toxic for our country. A house divided cannot stand. We're the United States of America, and right now we're more the divided states of America. These two poles become rigid. They get stuck, left, right, and then I'm right, you're wrong. We're smart and wise. You are an idiot. You want to destroy America. We want to save it. This type of thinking is toxic. And when each pole, they get stuck in their poles and they become further and further apart, it's a form of rigidity, a form of inflexibility. And I think it's causing suffering at the societal levels. It's become quite toxic, the hatred, the animosity, the looking at the other as the enemy, the unwillingness to compromise, this winner take all mentality is not healthy, and it's not congruent with the way the world works. The universe is not static. It isn't rigid. It's not in two poles. It's along a continuum, and it's constantly changing. So when we act in a way that's discrepant with the nature of the universe, this mismatch creates suffering. Another way of thinking about this is dualism versus non-dualism. And this is kind of an Eastern way of thinking, but dualism is that there's two poles. It is left, right, right, wrong, black, white, true, false, good, evil, liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, male, female, nature, nurture, self, other. It's one or the other, either or. There's no in between in dualism. And again, I think that's discrepant with the way the world works, and this discrepancy is the root of a lot of suffering. By contrast, non-dualism is more flexible. It sees an interconnectedness with everything. So even self and other, there's a, I can see myself in you, and I hope you can see yourself in me or your neighbor, and how like I'm married, so my wife, happy life. My happiness is connected to her happiness. So if I get in an argument with her, trying to prove that I am right and dogmatically do this, and it upsets her, her unhappiness then affects me. So I suffer if I cause her to suffer. So that's that interconnectedness. And really, the Democrats and Republicans, the way this animosity is, that we're mutually causing each other to suffer through the level of hatred and animosity. So that's the dualism, and the non-dualism sees things as more flexible, fluid, the interconnectedness. It accepts change and nuance. So dualism is inherently rigid and static, and it doesn't fit with the inherent way the world, the universe, we work. And we can reflect on that in our own lives and just see that we are changing all the time. You know, some of the beliefs we had when we were young, whether it's about God or politics, you know, ways we treat other people, those change. We learn and grow and change. And we can see that we're not static, yet somehow we get caught in these polarization traps and these dualistic ways of thinking that lead to a lot of suffering. So I would say the secret of success, in a way, or a secret of success, a secret is flexibility. Importantly, flexibility or rigidity, steadfastness, being resolute is subsumed within flexibility. So flexibility means when we need to be stern, we need to hold fast, we need to toe the line, we can do that. We flex to be more rigid. And then if the situation calls for us to be more fluid, then we do that. So that's because you might be thinking, well, does that mean I'm wishy-washy and I'm always changing? I need to follow certain rules, or as a parent, I need to be consistent, right? Yeah, well, you need to be consistent as a parent most of the time, but there'll be times when you shouldn't be consistent because you're in a situation that calls for something different. Like if you're told, I mean, this is kind of a silly example, but as a parent, you're supposed to always follow through with consequences, right? So if your kid took the iPad when he wasn't supposed to and was playing games, and maybe there would be a timeout or a loss of the iPad. Well, maybe your child, it was emergency services and they were trying to contact someone because there was an emergency. Well, you wouldn't punish them for taking the iPad there. Or, you know, if you were trying to impose a consequence and the house was on fire, well, you wouldn't impose the consequence. You would get your child to safety and you get to safety, and, you know, we won't deal with the timeout there. So we're rigid when we need to be, but then fluid and flexible when we need to be as well. So another way of thinking about this, instead of this either or, is both and. So non-dualism is both and. And I came across this idea of both and years ago. I was in a theological discussion group, and we talk about God, the universe, and everything, try to figure out life. And the rector, Greg Rickel, who's a bishop in Olympia, Washington now, when we were in this group and we would talk about different things, I'd often fall into my kind of more rigid ways of thinking, this black or white, either or. And sometimes the group would, and Greg would invariably like have a way of stepping back from it all and say, well, I think this is a bit more of a both and situation. And he would bring in this non-dualistic way of thinking that really helped change some of my views and perspectives, helped shape those. So I became more enamored with this kind of non-dualistic way of thinking. One of Bruce Lee's sayings is, use no way as way. I really love that one. And I was thinking of this, the way of both and, WOBA, way of both and, is the way we should be following, this non-dualistic, flexible way, but it isn't a way. It's like Bruce Lee said, using no way as way. So it's the way of both and isn't a particular way in a sense. It's a general concept that we fluidly move where we need to move depending on the situation. So a non-dualistic way of thinking about this, of something that I really love, is this: you are perfect as you are, and you can improve. So think about that for a second. You're perfect as you are, wherever you're at listening to this or watching, you're perfect. You're sitting down, maybe listening to this, maybe you're eating a granola bar, who knows, having a cup of coffee, and things are okay. You're as you are, just fine. And there's room for improvement. These two ideas can coexist. And that's what non-dualism is. Western thinking is like, well, no, if you're perfect, you can't improve. But I like the Eastern way of thinking is this more fluid and dynamic, non-dualistic. You're perfect as you are, and you can improve. So a takeaway from all this, the secret of success will change to a secret of success is flexibility. It's the way of both and. It is non-dualism. Now, here's the rub. The world is changing very rapidly. You just look at technology. We've gone from, just in a very short span of time, we've got the internet, high-speed internet, we've got social media, we've got smartphones, things are changing, TikTok, all these things, they're having an impact on society. Fake news and things like that are spreading outrage trends on social media, and we're having to deal with that. And fake news, spreads. It's hard to tell truth from lies and misinformation. The world is changing so rapidly that we need to up our flexibility game big time. That's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. Again, you're free to disagree, but this is the way I'm thinking about it, because change is happening more rapidly because of technology and other things. We need to be more flexible than ever. In the next episode, I'm going to cover the root of some of the world's problems. I've touched on it here today, but I want to dig deeper next time. So I hope you join me for that, because my thinking is, if we can understand what's going on in this crazy world of ours a little bit better, that's going to help point to ways we can deal with some of the challenges we face. This has been the Reasonably Good Podcast with Dr. Mike Brooks. Be curious, be flexible, be kind, and for goodness sakes, be reasonable. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you at my next episode. Take care. Hey, thanks again for joining me today. I want to give a special shout out to Eric Kenow and Patrick Kennedy for their help with both the podcast and YouTube versions of The Reasonably Good Life. If you enjoyed this episode, I always appreciate follows, likes, and shares. Also, if you want to follow me, my website is www.drmikebrooks.com. For Instagram and Twitter, I am at Dr. Mike Brooks. For Facebook, it's Dr. Mike Brooks - The Reasonably Good Life. And for email, you can contact me at contact@reasonablygoodlife.com. Thanks again, and I hope to see you next time.